A suitcase full of dreams. With a final, protesting groan of brakes and a dragging sigh of escaping steam, the train ground to a standstill. Harmony Gulch. The name itself was a whispered hope, a balm against the memory of scornful judgments that still echoed in Martha's ears. Her fingers tightened around the handle of her weathered suitcase, its metal clasp cold against her skin as she stepped onto the gritty platform, squinting against the bright sun. The station was a simple, faded structure, its once cream paint peeling away in strips. A figure detached himself from a supporting post, the shade of a broad Stetson obscuring his features. As she drew nearer, he straightened, his gaze sweeping over her. Not Jebediah, a pinprick of disappointment. Martha Ainsworth. The voice rumbled, a low cadence like pebbles shifting in a stream. Yes, she responded, a little breathless. Silas. Jeb's horse threw a shoe. He sent me to collect you. A nod towards a waiting buckboard served as his only further explanation. Hop in. No offer of assistance with the luggage. Martha heaved it up herself, the weight magnified by a sudden weariness. Settling onto the unyielding wooden seat, she found that Harmony Gulch, in reality, lacked the idyllic charm she'd imagined. The town was a single, sun-baked street lined with buildings displaying the ravages of time. A saloon sign proclaimed, "Thirsty? We can fix that," above swinging doors. The general store window held a jumble of fabrics and farm tools, coated in a film of dust. The air held the sense of dry earth, horseflesh, and a subtle sweetness, like bread baking in a distant oven. She attempted conversation during the ride, but Silas proved a man of few words, answering her inquiries with monosyllabic sounds while keeping his focus on the track ahead. From him, she gleaned that Jebediah ran a small ranch, raising cattle and growing hay. Winters were brutal, summers relentless. But about the man himself, she learned almost nothing. The ranch house eventually materialized, a humble dwelling of logs and rough planks, its isolation emphasized by its position on a rise overlooking the sprawling range. A windmill's rhythmic squeak cut through the stillness. Jebediah waited on the porch, a silhouette against the sinking sun. Taller than expected, his shoulders filled out a worn denim jacket. Removing his hat as they approached, he revealed a face lined by hardship, yet softened by surprisingly kind eyes. "Welcome, Martha," his voice a deep resonance. He took her hand, his rough palm surprisingly warm. "Thank you, Silas." With a curt nod, Silas turned the buckboard and departed. Martha remained, hand clasped in Jebediah's, a swirl of apprehension and expectation churning within her. This was it, her new beginning. He ushered her inside, into a single, spacious room crowned with a sleeping loft. A fireplace dominated one wall. A small table and chairs occupied the space near the window. Sparsely furnished, yet impeccably clean. A pot simmered on the stove, releasing a fragrant steam. "It's not much," Jebediah offered, his tone apologetic, "but it's home." "It's perfect," Martha replied, meaning it. After the stifling censure of Boston, its simplicity felt like solace. Later, after a simple meal of stew and biscuits, Martha sat by the window, watching the night sky fill with stars, a diamond dust scattered across black velvet. The sheer vastness of the landscape felt both daunting and strangely freeing. Her life back in Boston had been defined by the suffocating weight of expectations. Here, in this remote place, a sense of unbidden possibility bloomed within her. The advertisement in the mail-order bride catalog came to mind. Jebediah's words had been plain, unadorned, seeking a good woman to share my life. Must be willing to work hard and love the land. She hadn't sought love, not truly. Only a chance at reinvention, an escape from the stain that clung to her like a second skin. The scandal had been swift and merciless, a whispered accusation, a perfunctory trial, and then banishment. The church, the community, even her own family, had disowned her, leaving her with nothing but her dignity and a suitcase brimming with dreams that felt increasingly fragile. She closed her eyes, picturing the day she'd packed that suitcase. The precisely folded dresses, the worn Bible from her mother, the small silver locket containing a portrait of her younger sister. Each item a relic of the life she'd left behind, a life that now seemed like a mirage. Opening her eyes, she focused on the shimmering stars. This was her chance. A chance to rebuild, to redefine, to discover a place where she could finally belong. She harbored no illusions about the trials ahead. Ranch life would demand resilience. And Jebediah, she barely knew him. Yet, she'd glimpsed a quiet strength in his gaze, a kindness that resonated within her. Reaching into her suitcase, she retrieved her mother's Bible, her fingers tracing the well-worn pages. A verse leapt out at her. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. A wave of tranquility enveloped her. She wasn't alone. She possessed her faith, her inner strength, and a suitcase crammed with hope. And perhaps, just perhaps, she had discovered a place where those aspirations could finally take root and blossom. Whispers in the Church. The Harmony Gulch Church, a testament to both simple construction and staunch belief, throbbed with an edgy energy. It wasn't reverence. It was a prickly anticipation that seemed to permeate the aged wood like the scent of lemon polish. Suspended opinions hung heavy in the air, thick as the dust dancing in the window light. The women, decked out in their Sabbath finery, faded floral arrangements perched atop their heads, rigid collars acting like tiny guillotines, fluttered hymnals, their gaze flitting to the vacant front pews. They held court in Harmony Gulch, their judgments carrying the weight of Scripture in this secluded spot. There was Mrs. Abernathy, whose barbs could strip paint, the widow Higgins, draped in a perpetual mourning that soured at others' joy, and Bess, barely past girlhood, already mimicking the pursed-lipped disapproval of her elders. The men, meanwhile, engaged in quieter evaluations. A symphony of throat clearings and suspender adjustments accompanied their feigned absorption in the well-worn floorboards, all while covertly observing the entrance. Their expressions ran the gamut from polite interest to veiled cynicism. Only old Mr. Hemlock, seasoned by life's letdowns, wore a knowing smile, as if privy to a predictable farce. Murmurs, like tiny rodents, scurried through the pews. 43, you say? Jebediah must be desperate indeed. That was Mrs. Abernathy, her voice a sandpaper rasp that carried with remarkable ease. Imagine starting anew at that age. What's she concealing? Widow Higgins chimed in, her tone laced with morbid fascination. Perhaps she is homely as a stump, Bess piped, a nervous giggle earning her a quelling glance from her mother. The buzz heightened as Jebediah appeared. He wore his best suit, the one he reserved for funerals and trips to the county seat. It swam on him, emphasizing his thin frame. His face was ashen, his hands trembling almost imperceptibly as he settled into the front pew. Avoiding all eyes, he fixed his stare on the abstract patterns of the stained glass above the altar. Reverend Peabody, his face lengthened by years of absorbing the town's woes, cleared his throat, struggling to reclaim his restless flock. Let us open our hymnals to page 127, he announced, his voice amplified too much for the sanctuary. The rustle of paper momentarily subdued the atmosphere, but the undercurrent of speculation continued to bubble. Jebediah barely heard the hymn. His mind was a tempest of worries. Would she find Harmony Gulch agreeable? Would she be disappointed by him? He conjured her image, gleaned from the photograph, and a spark of hope flared. He held onto that vision, a beacon in the squall of his trepidation. He glanced at the empty spot beside him, a sharp reminder of his solitude. For years, only the echo of his quiet existence had occupied that space. Now a possibility of fragile hope existed that it would be filled with warmth, with companionship, with love. The anticipation made his chest ache with a blend of yearning and anxiety. As the hymn concluded, an expectant quiet descended. Every eye was riveted on the doorway, awaiting the arrival of the woman poised to reshape their insular world. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, punctuated only by the groan of the pews and the nervous coughs rippling through the congregation. Jebediah felt a solitary drop of perspiration race down his temple. He shut his eyes, offering a silent plea for fortitude, for bravery, and for the woman about to cross the threshold. He prayed they would both discover what they sought, even if it lay buried beneath layers of doubt. He opened his eyes just as the doors groaned. Laughter and tears. The church doors groaned inward as Martha Ainsworth entered. Her pulse thrummed a frantic tattoo, a stark contrast to the reverent quiet of the sanctuary. Light refracted through the stained glass, casting a kaleidoscope of colors across the time-worn floorboards as she began her slow procession. She'd chosen a simple azure dress, hoping its unpretentious cut would speak of quiet dignity. A posy of wildflowers, gathered during the stagecoach ride, trembled in her grasp. Her gaze locked on the altar, the promise of belonging drawing her forward. Jebediah stood silhouetted against the eastern sun, waiting. Each step stretched into an eternity. She felt the scrutiny of countless eyes, assessing, dissecting. She fought to ignore them, struggling to recall the warmth of Jebediah's written words, but the silence pressed down on her like a shroud, stealing her resolve. She was nearly halfway to the altar when the sound broke. A mean little snicker, sharp as a shard of glass, shattered the stillness. It originated near the back pews, where Mrs. Abernathy and the widow Higgins held sway. Martha's breath caught in her throat. She willed herself to dismiss it as imagination. Then another, louder snort, followed by a wave of suppressed giggles that rippled through the assembled townsfolk. Curiosity gave way to thinly veiled amusement, faces twisting into expressions of cruel delight. The laughter swelled, a tidal wave of mockery gaining momentum. It was a derisive chorus, poisoned with malice. It bounced off the vaulted ceiling, amplifying her shame. Martha's vision swam. The wildflowers slipped from her suddenly numb fingers, scattering like fallen confetti. She faltered, a spotlight of ridicule pinning her in place. Snippets of vicious whispers reached her ears. That dress, so countrified. Did you see that bonnet? Last season's. He must be desperate. The laughter escalated, bursting into unrestrained braying. Hot tears stung Martha's eyes, blurring the rows of faces. The church, moments before a haven, now felt like a trap. She searched for Jebediah, pleading for a flicker of reassurance, an affirmation that he wasn't party to their cruelty. But his features were obscured by shadow, his stance unyielding. His thoughts were unreadable. Panic surged. She couldn't breathe, couldn't process. She had to escape. Spinning around, she bolted back up the aisle, the fabric of her dress catching on the splintered wood of the pews. The laughter pursued her, an unrelenting, jeering soundtrack. She shoved open the heavy doors and stumbled into the blinding sunlight, gasping for air. The glare was harsh, but she dared not pause. She didn't look back. She fled blindly, without direction, driven only by the need to escape the stifling laughter and the crushing weight of their condemnation. Past the general store, past the clanging forge of the blacksmith, past the gawking faces of bystanders. She ran until her lungs burned and her muscles screamed, until the sound of their scorn receded into the distance, drowned out by the frantic rhythm of her own heart. She ran until she reached the edge of town, with a vast prairie unfolded before her, a boundless expanse of swaying grasses and windswept sky. There, she collapsed, overwhelmed by sobs, the dream of a new life pulverized. The wildflowers, once emblems of hope, lay discarded and crushed in the dust. Harmony Gulch, the place she'd envisioned as home, had become a monument to her disgrace. Chasing a dream, the jeering sliced through Jebediah like shards of glass, a vicious wave of snickers and outright braying echoing off the church's freshly plastered walls. This wasn't good-natured ribbing over a dropped prayer book or a child's trip. It was targeted malice, every barb aimed at Martha. A bitter chill gripped his insides as he saw her spine curve inward, the hopeful spark in her eyes dissolving like frost under a harsh sun. He'd been oblivious. Lost in his own anxieties, his yearning for a clean slate, he'd ignored the obvious, the simmering bigotry that festered beneath the placid surface of their small town. How could he have been so blind? The laughter swelled, fueled by its own cruelty. A hot, fierce anger surged through Jebediah. He longed to roar, to silence the lot of them, to shield Martha from their pettiness. But the words died on his tongue as he met Martha's gaze, her face a canvas of raw anguish. In her eyes, he saw not a desire for confrontation, but a silent plea for escape. Then, a fleeting glimpse of blue calico, and she vanished through the church doors. Jebediah lunged forward, shouldering past startled faces. "Martha!" he bellowed, his voice cracking with urgency. He stumbled into the brilliant prairie sunlight, momentarily blinded by the glare. Squinting, he made out her form, a lone figure silhouetted against the endless expanse of swaying grasses. She was fleeing from him, from them, from everything that had just transpired. "Martha, please!" He gave chase, his boots thudding against the parched earth. The wedding suit felt like a leaden weight, suffocating him. He tore at the constricting collar, fighting for air. This kind of exertion was beyond him now. Years of toil had left their mark, protesting joints and a breathlessness he couldn't dismiss. He pressed on, Martha's retreating figure a beacon for his weary limbs. He had to reach her. He had to explain, to make her understand. The prairie unfolded before him, a boundless ocean of emerald and gold. The wind buffeted him, carrying the scent of wild flowers and the distant promise of storm. The church and its venomous congregation seemed a world away, a fading, ugly memory. Each step was a battle against his aging body, against the doubts that preyed on his mind. Had he irrevocably broken things? Had his desperation masked the reality of this place? Had he lured Martha into an impossible situation? Her letter flashed in his memory, filled with hopeful prose of finding a sanctuary, a community, a sense of belonging. He had promised her that, hadn't he? He had conjured a vision of a life brimming with affection and acceptance, a world away from the solitude she'd known. Now, the brutal truth stared back at him. He had failed her. He had offered a dream, a fragile mirage that had shattered against the hard wall of prejudice. He faltered, steadying himself against a twisted shrub. His lungs burned, his muscles screamed, yet he refused to concede. He owed her this much. As he closed the distance, he could see her more clearly. The wind lashed at her hair, swirling it around her face like a dark, frenzied corona. Her frame shuddered, her sobs stolen by the breeze. A profound certainty settled within him. He couldn't let her go. He had made a vow, not just to her, but to himself. He had promised himself redemption, a chance at contentment, a chance to fashion a meaningful existence. And that chance, he realized with sudden clarity, was slipping away from him, swallowed by the vast, unforgiving prairie. Summoning his last reserves of strength, he cried out again, his voice raspy but firm with conviction. "Martha, please just stop. Let me explain." Honesty at the station. The prairie wind clawed at Martha, smearing tears across her cheeks, each waft a tormenting echo of shared laughter. Her boots, scuffed and thin, stumbled on the rough terrain as she pressed onward, propelled by a raw urge to vanish into the boundless expanse that mirrored her desolation. The rented bridal gown snagged on a prickly thistle. A choked sob escaped her as she tore free, the sound lost to the bluster. Destination mattered little. Escape from Harmony Gulch, its sanctimonious grins and judging gazes, that was everything. A ragged cough ripped through the air. Martha spun, heart hammering, to see Jebediah, doubled over, fighting for breath. His complexion was feverish, normally flinty eyes glazed with pain. He resembled a man on a crumbling ledge. "Martha," he rasped, voice a strained whisper. "Please wait." Hesitation flickered, anger warring with a tremor of concern. He looked genuinely ill. Yet the sting of those faces, so cruel, so unforgiving, held her fast. Jebediah slowly straightened, hand pressed against his side. He took a hesitant step, then another. I need to explain. Martha stayed silent, arms crossed defensively. He wouldn't find forgiveness easily earned. He had brought her here, displayed her before that venomous crowd. An explanation was the least he owed. He halted a few feet away, the space feeling like an abyss. His gaze remained earthbound. The wind worried his thinning hair, exposing patches of sun-baked scalp. He looked every bit his age, and then some. I should have been honest, he began, his voice nearly lost to the wind. About the spread. Martha frowned. The spread? What about it? He swallowed, Adam's apple jerking. It's gone, Martha. Gone. Bank took it all. Drought, poor choices, all gone. The words hung, stark and unforgiving. A curious cocktail of surprise and something close to pity stirred within Martha. She'd envisioned him a man of substance, a pillar of the community. Before her stood a broken man, as exposed as she felt. I was ashamed, he confessed, his voice gaining slight strength. Too ashamed to tell you. Thought you wouldn't have me if you knew. Just another busted cowboy, offering nothing. He finally met her gaze, eyes pleading. Try to shield you, Martha. In my own damn fool way. Only made it worse. She scrutinized him, searching for deception, finding only raw pain and regret. The scorching anger began to cool, replaced by a pervasive emptiness. Why, Jebediah? Why the deception? He lowered his head. Pride, I reckon, and fear, scared of losing you before I even had you. A mirthless laugh escaped Martha. You lost me already, Jebediah. Back there in that church. He recoiled, as though struck. I know. Deeply sorry. Never imagined never knew they could be that vicious. Martha's gaze wandered toward the horizon, where the setting sun splashed the sky with fiery colors. She recalled her own shadowed past, the very reason she'd answered his advertisement. Running from disgrace and whispers, she'd sought only a new beginning, a place to belong, someone to cherish her. I wasn't after a ranch, Jebediah, she said quietly, her voice almost swallowed by the gusting wind. Not after money or security. I came seeking affection, a home, a family. Was that too much to ask? Her words lingered, a delicate plea for something that felt increasingly out of reach. She studied Jebediah, his face a mask of contrition, and wondered if anything remained to be salvaged from the wreckage of their rushed union. The station bell tolled in the distance, a mournful clang. The train was coming. She knew she faced a choice, and the clock was ticking. A train station wedding. The locomotive exhaled a plume of steam, eager to depart. But Martha bolted, not toward Chicago's beckoning lights, but away from the suffocating disapproval, from Jebediah's devastating revelation, from the church's pealing chimes that mocked her shattered expectations. She fled into the vast, pitiless prairie, the prairie wind snapping her bonnet ribbons. How far she ran, she couldn't say, only that her lungs screamed and her heart throbbed with an ache that resonated with a history beyond her years. She faltered, collapsing in the tall grass, her borrowed bridal gown pooling around her. Behind her, the thud of boots on the dirt path. Jebediah. He dropped to her side, breathless, pleading. Martha, he rasped, his voice thick with anguish. Don't leave. Please. She averted her eyes, shame a venomous serpent coiling within. What remains for me here, Jebediah? Your deception, their condemnation. I know, he murmured, barely audible. His roughened hand wavered near hers, hesitant to make contact. I was a fool, a conceited, frightened fool. But Martha, I meant every word about wanting you, about cherishing you. He withdrew his hand, defeated. The silence hung, heavy with things unsaid. Then he rose. Martha followed him with her gaze, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, as he strode back towards the depot. Had she finally pushed him away? But he wasn't abandoning her. He was conversing with Mr. Abernathy, the station master, gesticulating emphatically. Mr. Abernathy, A man whose face usually bore the grimace of punctuality looked perplexed, then intrigued. Then was that a hint of a smile playing on his lips? Jebediah returned, his face animated with a newfound hope. He offered his hand again. "Martha," he declared, his voice steadier now, tinged with a vulnerable plea. "I offer no riches, no sprawling ranch. Just honesty. Just me. If you'll accept." Martha stared, bewildered. "What are you proposing, Jebediah?" He inhaled deeply. "Let's marry. Right here. Right now." The words seemed ludicrous, yet strangely alluring. "Here? Now? But my dress is ruined. There's no clergyman." A grin bloomed, a radiant, captivating smile that banished the shadows from his face. "Abernathy has volunteered to officiate. Claims his experience with countless arrivals and departures qualifies him as a matrimonial expert. And the dress." He paused, reaching into his coat. He produced a shawl he'd purchased for her, the one she'd admired in town. A deep, reassuring indigo, the color of the dusk sky. He draped it gently over her shoulders. "It'll keep you warm and enhance your beauty." He then knelt once more, extracting something else from his pocket. Not a diamond bauble, nothing of monetary worth. A ring crafted from wild flowers, delicate and fragrant, painted in the hues of the prairie sunset. He extended it to her. "It's humble," he confessed, his voice thick with emotion. "But it's all I possess. Will you, Martha Ainsworth, pledge yourself to me, Jebediah Stone, for better or worse, fully aware that worse may exceed our wildest fears?" Martha gazed at the wildflower ring, the comforting weight of the shawl, the raw, hopeful vulnerability in Jebediah's eyes. She conjured the image of the church, the hushed whispers, the judgmental stares. Then she recalled the honesty they had shared, the stark, painful truth that had inexplicably bound them together. She grasped his hand, his calloused fingers enveloping hers. "Yes, Jebediah," she replied, her voice trembling yet resolute. "I will." Mr. Abernathy cleared his throat with importance. He had extracted spectacles from his pocket, perching them on his nose, clutching a worn rule book. The train, momentarily forgotten, vented its impatience. "Right then," he announced, his voice surprisingly sonorous. "Let's get this ceremony underway, so to speak. Do you, Jebediah Stone, take this woman?" Martha squeezed Jebediah's hand, a silent pledge. The prairie breeze rustled around them, carrying the scent of wildflowers and the distant rumble of the iron horse. This was not the wedding of her dreams. Yet as she looked at Jebediah, his face reflecting both hope and trepidation, she realized it was precisely the wedding she was destined to have. A wedding conceived not of illusion, but of truth. A train station wedding, a new beginning on a journey they would navigate together, whatever lay ahead. Forgiveness and cake. The telegraph clicked and whirred, spitting out news like a gossiping magpie. The station master, still slightly flustered from his impromptu officiating duties, hardly needed to read the message to know its contents. Everyone in Harmony Gulch knew about the spectacle at the train station. Jebediah Blackwood, the broken cowboy, and Martha Ainsworth, the mail-order bride scorned, had tied the knot right there on the dusty platform. The news rippled outwards, faster than a prairie fire in a high wind. It reached the church ladies first, gathered for their weekly quilting bee, needles poised like weapons. Silence fell over the room, the only sound the rhythmic creak of Mrs. Abernathy's rocking chair. Her face, usually a roadmap of wrinkles etched by piety, was now a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. "Married?" she finally croaked, her voice thin and reedy. "Right there? Without a proper sermon? Without." She trailed off, unable to articulate the depth of the impropriety. Constance Plumtree, known for her sharp tongue and even sharper wit, spoke next. "Well, I never did believe in letting good cake go to waste." A murmur rippled through the room. The cake. The three-tiered confection, adorned with sugar roses and promises of a sweet future, now sat forlornly in the church kitchen, a monument to their collective judgment. Agnes, the baker, usually a woman of few words, stood abruptly. We were wrong. Her voice, though quiet, carried the weight of conviction. We judge her too harshly. We listen to whispers and gossip instead of looking into our own hearts. The room remained silent for a long moment. Then, one by one, heads began to nod. The shame, which had been a dull ache in their consciences since Martha's flight, now blossomed into a full-blown remorse. "We have to do something," said Clara, her voice trembling slightly. "We can't just let them be alone with this." A flurry of activity followed. The half-finished quilt was abandoned, needles and threads scattered like fallen leaves. Mrs. Abernathy, her shock replaced by a newfound determination, barked orders like a seasoned general. "Agnes, get that cake ready. Constance, gather what you can from the pantry. Clara, fetch your best linens." Within the hour, a small procession wound its way towards the Blackwood Ranch, a motley collection of women bearing gifts and burdens of guilt. Agnes carried the cake, its sugary roses now seeming to bloom with renewed hope. Constance lugged a basket overflowing with canned peaches, homemade bread, and a jar of her famous pickled onions. Clara clutched a stack of hand-stitched pillowcases, their delicate embroidery a testament to her skill and a symbol of her sincere apology. They walked in silence, the only sound the rustling of their skirts and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. As they neared the ranch house, a sense of trepidation settled over them. What would they say? How would they be received? The house looked deserted, the windows dark and uninviting. Mrs. Abernathy, summoning her courage, knocked firmly on the door. The silence stretched, heavy and thick, until finally the door creaked open. Jebediah stood there, his face etched with weariness, his eyes guarded. He looked surprised, then wary, as he took in the assembled women. Martha stood behind him, peeking over his shoulder, her expression unreadable. We brought you something," Mrs. Abernathy stammered, gesturing towards the cake. "We wanted to apologize." Agnes stepped forward, holding out the cake. "We were wrong, Martha. Forgive us." The other women echoed her sentiments, their voices a chorus of remorse. They offered their gifts, their apologies, their heartfelt wishes for happiness. Martha's face softened. A slow smile spread across her lips, chasing away the shadows of the past few days. "Come in," she said, her voice gentle. "Please come in." The women filed into the small house, their presence filling the space with warmth and a sense of newfound hope. The air, thick with unspoken apologies and tentative forgiveness, slowly began to clear. The cake, finally fulfilling its purpose, sat proudly on the table, a symbol of a community finding its way back to grace. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like there was room for sweetness amidst the dust and hardship of Harmony Gulch. Rebuilding harmony. The first rays of dawn painted the sky with hues of apricot and rose, but instead of birdsong, the air at Blackwood Ranch crackled with the sound of hammers, saws, and voices raised in surprisingly cheerful shouts. The men of Harmony Gulch had arrived before sunrise, axes gleaming in the nascent light, their faces set with a purpose that transcended mere neighborly obligation. They were rebuilding not just the barn that had partially collapsed under the weight of years and neglect, but something within themselves as well. Martha stood on the porch, her expression unreadable as she watched the flurry of activity. The previous days, a chaotic blend of whispered apologies and hastily offered gifts, had left her feeling strangely numb. She'd offered polite smiles and murmured thank yous, but inside, a cautious part of her remained guarded, unsure if this sudden outpouring of goodwill was genuine or merely a fleeting moment of collective guilt. Jebediah, sensing her unease, walked over and gently took her hand. "They're here for you, Martha," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "For us. Give them a chance." He squeezed her hand, then strode towards the barn, his familiar drawl ringing out, directing the men with a newfound confidence that surprised even himself. Watching him, Martha felt a flicker of warmth ignite within her. Perhaps, just perhaps, this new beginning wasn't so impossible after all. As the sun climbed higher, the rhythm of the work intensified. Old Man Hemlock, surprisingly spry for his age, wielded an axe with surprising force, splitting logs for the foundation. Young Billy Perkins, eager to prove himself, hauled timber with the tireless energy of youth. Even Sheriff Brody, his badge glinting in the sun, lent a hand, his usual stern demeanor softened by a rare smile. Martha, feeling a pull to contribute, ventured inside the house. The interior was still bare, echoing with emptiness. But she saw potential, a blank canvas waiting for her touch. She began by unpacking the few possessions she had brought with her: quilts stitched with intricate patterns, hand-painted porcelain dolls, and a small collection of books that had been her solace during lonely nights. The quilts, vibrant splashes of color against the rough-hewn walls, instantly transformed the space. She arranged the dolls on a shelf, their painted eyes seeming to watch over the room with gentle curiosity. Then she tackled the kitchen. She scrubbed the counters until they gleamed, the scent of lemon filling the air. She rummaged through the meager supplies Jebediah had and, with a resourceful ingenuity born of necessity, began to bake bread, the warm, yeasty aroma soon permeating the entire house. Outside, the sounds of construction continued unabated. Jebediah, his shirt soaked with sweat, paused to wipe his brow and glanced towards the house. He saw Martha framed in the doorway, her face softened by the warm light, and a surge of tenderness washed over him. He'd never imagined finding such a capable, strong woman. He rejoined the men, his movements infused with renewed vigor. He worked alongside them, shoulder to shoulder, the shared labor forging a bond of camaraderie. There were no awkward silences, no veiled glances, only the honest sweat and satisfaction of working towards a common goal. As the day wore on, the barn slowly began to take shape. Walls rose, beams were secured, and a new roof began to stretch across the sky. With each nail hammered, with each board hoisted, a sense of hope and renewal spread through the ranch, seeping into the very soil. By late afternoon, the aroma of Martha's baking wafted across the yard, beckoning the weary workers. She had laid out a simple feast, fresh bread, ham, and a pot of hearty stew, on a makeshift table in the shade of an old oak tree. The men gathered around, their faces grimy but beaming with satisfaction. As they ate, laughter filled the air. Stories were shared, jokes were told, and for the first time since Martha's arrival, she felt like she truly belonged. Jebediah sat beside her, his arm resting casually around her shoulders, his eyes filled with a love that transcended the hasty vows and scandalous circumstances of their wedding. After the meal, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the ranch, the men began to pack up their tools. They offered Jebediah handshakes and pats on the back, their eyes filled with a genuine warmth. "We'll be back tomorrow, Jebediah," Old Man Hemlock said, his voice gruff but sincere. "We ain't finished yet." As the last of the townsfolk departed, Jebediah and Martha stood hand in hand, watching them go. The barn, though still unfinished, stood as a testament to the power of community and the possibility of redemption. "Thank you," Martha said softly, turning to Jebediah, "for believing in me." He cupped her face in his hands, his eyes searching hers. "I believe in us, Martha, and I believe in Harmony Gulch. Maybe, just maybe, we can build something real here." They walked towards the house, the setting sun casting a golden glow on their faces. Inside, the warm light spilled out through the windows, beckoning them home. The house was no longer just a shelter. It was a sanctuary, a place where they could build a life together, brick by brick, mistake by mistake, filled with love and forgiveness. The rebuilding of harmony had begun, not just on the ranch, but in their hearts and in the heart of the town itself. Anniversary at the station. Harmony Gulch's depot, once the epicenter of her private anguish, now throbbed with vibrant life. Carefully hung lanterns splashed the time-worn platform with a honeyed radiance. Laughter, A melody Martha once feared, silenced forever, danced on the crisp autumn breeze. Tonight, it was her own, woven with Jebediah's resonant guffaws and her grandchildren's bright squeals. 2 decades. 2 decades since that calamitous arrival, since the judging glances and hushed pronouncements. 20 years since Jebediah, defying convention, had chosen her. Martha lingered a few steps back, leaning against the depot's solid brick facade, a silent observer. Her face, as usual, presented an initial enigma, a carefully maintained composure so ingrained it felt inseparable from her. Yet, as she absorbed the tableau of her family, Jebediah, a silver-maned giant, playfully lofting a giggling granddaughter skyward, their daughter, Sarah, bearing Martha's capable hands and Jebediah's benevolent gaze, deep in conversation with a cluster of women, the tautness around her mouth eased. The scent of burning wood and spiced cider hung in the air, a comforting balm to her soul. A gramophone, unearthed from somewhere, spun a scratchy waltz, filling the lulls in conversation. Spotting her solitude, Jebediah excused himself and crossed to her, his stride surprisingly brisk for his years. He enfolded her hand in his weathered palm a warm anchor. "A thought for your thoughts, Martha." Her fingers tightened around his. "Just remembering." Remembering what? That fire and brimstone sermon. He squeezed her hand, an unspoken promise. A genuine smile blossomed on Martha's face, etching delicate lines at the corners of her eyes. No, remembering the frightened, solitary woman who disembarked that train. She'd never believe this, Jebediah. Never imagined any of this possible. He drew her close, his arm a reassuring weight around her shoulders. That woman possessed steel, Martha, more than she knew. It's no small thing to abandon everything and begin anew. And it requires a fool to wed her, Martha retorted, her voice thick with unshed tears. Jebediah's booming laugh resonated, a sound that always anchored her. "Maybe I was a fool, but it's been my finest folly." He paused, his gaze encompassing the gathering. "Behold, Martha, behold what we've cultivated." He spoke true. They had fashioned a life, a family, a haven. It hadn't been without struggle. There had been trials, setbacks, moments shrouded in uncertainty. Yet, through it all, they had endured, bonded by a love that had defied whispers and ultimately mended broken pieces. Their son, Caleb, approached his own child, Daniel, clutching his leg. "Grandpa, Grandma, presents now?" Daniel chirped, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. "Gifts already?" Jebediah feigned astonishment. "I presumed we convened merely for the cider." Martha chuckled, tousling Daniel's hair. Very well. Let's unwrap the gifts. But you must vow to share with your cousins." As they convened around a makeshift table groaning under the weight of brightly adorned presents, Martha felt a wave of gratitude, so intense it nearly overwhelmed her. She had arrived in Harmony Gulch seeking anonymity, a refuge from her past. Instead, she had stumbled upon a home, a family, and an affection that had reshaped her in ways she could never have foreseen. Later, as the festivities waned and the lanterns dimmed, Jebediah guided Martha back to their earlier vantage point. The depot was still, the only audible sound a whisper of leaves in the nearby trees. "You know," Jebediah began, turning to face her, "I once perceived this place as merely a waypoint, a place to load livestock and dispatch goods. But it's more than that, isn't it? It's a portal to fresh beginnings." Martha inclined her head, her gaze drawn to the tracks that snaked into the inky blackness. "Indeed, it's where our narrative commenced." He reached into his pocket and produced a time-worn silver locket. He opened it, revealing 2 miniature portraits, one of Martha as a young woman, her expression guarded and wary, the other of Jebediah, younger, leaner, his eyes alight with a daring optimism. "I've kept these close," he murmured, his voice laced with tenderness. "A reminder of our origins and the distance we've traversed." Martha accepted the locket, her fingers tracing the faded outlines. She studied the 2 visages, the faces of their former selves, and then met Jebediah's gaze, his eyes brimming with an affection that had only deepened with the passage of time. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Thank you for seeing me, Jebediah, for looking beyond the gossip and the suppositions, for seeing the woman I truly was." He clasped her hand again, his grip unwavering and comforting. "I saw you, Martha. I always saw you." As they stood there, entwined, beneath the star-studded canopy, Martha understood that their odyssey was far from complete. Yet, she also knew that they would confront any forthcoming challenges together, their devotion a guiding star in the sprawling and unpredictable panorama of existence. And in that instant, enveloped by the lingering echoes of merriment and the solace of her family, Martha experienced a serenity she had never dared hope for. The depot, once a monument to her despair, had blossomed into a testament to the enduring strength of love and the promise of a future brimming with possibility.